Hello, and welcome once again to my YouTube channel. My name is John Rose, and this video is really going to challenge pretty much everybody born after 1975. Who am I kidding? It's going to challenge everybody. I don't care if you're born before 75 or not, but I've found out from my own experience with one of my friends long ago who finally admitted to me after about 2 years of coaching him that he said, you know, John, I've really loved what you've taught me over the years and have embraced everything you said, except had a hard time with this one, and it's been 2 years I never let on to it. I was just nodding my head saying yeah, but I just couldn't wrap my brain around what you were trying to tell me about. But I'm getting it now. I'm finally getting it. Took him 2 years, and he was around 28, I guess, or so when I first met him, and I believe he was born. That would have put him right around close to when a big event happened. And that's what's going to challenge some of you guys. And what I'm going to talk about is what I talked a little bit about in my previous video. AIDS, which is not a disease, it's a syndrome. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It's a collection of symptoms. This is not a disease. And plus, I pointed out in my previous video that there are no diseases. That's a made-up name that crooked medical hucksters use to describe the effect. You don't describe an effect when it's lifestyle related. You name the lifestyle. You name the cause. But AIDS is like any other disease name that these guys came up with. Remember that quote by Plato? We have made of ourselves living cesspools and driven doctors to invent names for our diseases. Remember, they just name our symptom based on the stage and the location it's in. But now with AIDS, it's a whole different story, and the timing of this is crucial. That's why I said if you're born, close to 1980, even before then, even when this came about, if you're a 5 or 6, I'm sure the brainwashing could have started then. No doubt it had, even whether you had any ability for critical thinking or not, which most kids never do at that time. But anyway, it's hard to wrap our brain around this because we've been bombarded by this bullshit for a long time. A lot of confusion around this area. The virus, the HIV causes AIDS myth. One of the first things I read on the subject was a book by T.C. Fry. I remember going up there with my buddy, Bob Wood, up to Austin. We saw T.C. Fry, met him, and he had just finished that book, and we got a copy of it. And never forget if I met T.C. Fry. He was probably around my age now when I first met him. Turned out he didn't live very much longer, but we drive up to his place. Let me digress for a second. We go in there and introduce ourselves and talk for a few minutes. He said, let me show you my publishing building over here where I publish everything. And he goes, I'll race you. As soon as he gets out the door, he starts taking off. And he was fast. And I could have caught him, but I just been driving in the car for 3 hours. I wasn't stupid enough to start sprinting. But anyway, T.C. Fry wrote an interesting book called The Great AIDS Hoax. A lot of people believe this is why he changed his whole focus from wellness to freedom, realizing the role these psychopaths play in bombarding our brains with so much bullshit. When he researched the topic, he found out that the CDC, Center of Disease Control, was facing budget cuts. So at the end of the 1970s, they dismantled syphilis, they dismantled syphilis. They had 4 stages. They just simply renamed it. First stage, they renamed herpes genitalia. So that was why when you look at the first year they did this, there were like 30 million cases. Usually we get 6 million every year, but all of a sudden this year, because we renamed everything, whatever you had before, now you got this. Amazing. In fact, they do that a lot. To play with statistics. Oh, we eradicated polio. We just call it spinal meningitis now. But anyway, the CDC, facing budget cuts, they dismantled this disease so they could have a new disease. And what's interesting, and I've done this, you can look at the books, the Merrick manuals, you can look at their Bible, right in the late 70s, 78, 79 copy, look at it, look at the 4 stages of syphilis, then look at a 1980 version or anything after that, and you'll see herpes, AIDS, acquired syndrome, AIDS, dementia, and then full-blown AIDS. And when you look at those 4 diseases, they're word for word, they didn't even change any words except the title of the stage of the disease. Pretty obvious what they're doing here. But what's really interesting at this time, again, T.C. Fry said, hey, this isn't what it appears to be. We know that viruses are a scam. We know that the germ theory is a scam. They invented the virus theory before they even had microscopes that could supposedly see it. And now what they show us, I don't even want to go into that part right now. I'll come back to Fry, but around the same time, that one of the next books I read was the one by Peter Duesberg, Inventing the Great AIDS Virus, or Hoax, or whatever. What was the name of that book? Inventing the AIDS Virus, I believe is what it's called. Peter Duesberg, at the time, he was the world's foremost, #1 virologist. They hired Duesberg to go out there and prove HIV is causing AIDS. His conclusion, poppycock. It's not what's causing it. What causes it? Things that are going to suppress your immune system. What specifically? Drugs, poisons. And what he found is that the people who had this condition were big drug users. Oh, but John, clean needles, it's just a dirty needle. No, they're drug users. It's the drug. The drug is damaging the immune system. Recreational drugs, prescription drugs, they all do that. Now, what was interesting around this time, for me, there was a interesting man that he called himself Gentry, and I even have a file on Gentry's story where I kept track of all the things he posted about what happened to him. And he was explaining that in 1980 he came down with this diagnosis, HIV/AIDS. Oh my gosh. And at that time he had all of his friends around him dying. And what were they dying from? The treatments. Remember, if you have measles, they give you a drug, you get another drug, you get another disease name. So what were they using for these poor people with AIDS? AZT. It was a chemotherapy treatment that was so deadly they quit using it for cancer. So why'd they use it for AIDS? Because they wanted these guys to die. They wanted to make it look like there's a pandemic. Oh my God, invisible killers. They put a lot of energy into this, folks. A lot of energy they put into this manipulation to make us think that there are these invisible things coming at us. Now, getting back to Gentry's story, he shared what happened to him. He was gay, and he explained at that time in life, I don't know if their lifestyles changed, I'm not that familiar with it back then, I'm not gay, but according to him, he said that in those days, we were super big partiers. And we're not just talking about on the weekend, we're talking about night after night after night after night, and we're not just talking about a few things, we're talking about everything, every drug imaginable is their lifestyle. That's why they came down with an immune system that was hurting. It was deficient. On top of that, they were getting all these STDs, so they were giving more antibiotics, so a lot of drugs were given. Now, what Gentry says, he goes, I didn't want to go that route, so I researched things and I found raw food. And I changed my diet. Man, I was healthy. It worked. No more AIDS. No more HIV. And then he came back to a raw food message board, and this was in the early 2000 time period, is when he posted this information. He goes, guess what? I slipped up and went back to my old ways. I got the northern symptoms again, but I know what to do, but I wanted to share my story with you. And it's an interesting story because it shows you what happens. Drugs damage the body. And the people who are supposed to help us understand that, they don't know. They use drugs. First, do no harm. Poppycock. They wouldn't know how not to harm someone if their life depended on it, because that's all they're given. Things to harm people. It just is not the solution. So, Peter Duesberg knew that this was a scam. Gary Knoll, Dr. Gary Knoll, I taped several shows of him when he was on Tony Brown's Journal on PBS. He had this guy Chuck DeMarco on. He also was on there one time with Arthur Ashe, who died about a month or two after that. Poor Ashe didn't take Gary Knoll's advice. Now, Gary Knowles worked with quite a few people with AIDS. I remember when I saw Charlotte Gerson come, when she was in Houston in like 1991 or 2, someone asked her, hey, does the Gerson therapy work with AIDS? And she goes, of course it does. But the Mexican government doesn't want us to be known, the Mexican government doesn't want Mexico to be known as an AIDS haven, so they really couldn't broadcast it. Of course it does. Anytime you damage yourself, the whole solution is always the same thing, build it back up with natural food. So, if we look at what happened to Gentry, again, classic example. He found raw food, it reversed it, he messed up, it went right back to it. Now, with Peter Duesberg, again, he saw that it was obvious what was causing the problem. It was the drugs. The drugs caused the problem. So, who were the main people who were coming down with AIDS in the beginning? They were your heavy drug users and the homosexual community. So what's the mainstream solution? Orthodox solution? Clean needles and condoms. This is not something that's contagious. It's our habits that's causing this problem. Now, as I mentioned, Gary Knoll was on PBS several times, and he was explaining his protocol. Lots of raw food, lots of juices. He was doing a few extra things that may or may not have really been needed to do. That would be under the art, you could call that. But anyway, he had this guy Chuck DeMarco on, and he had him on the journal with him. And you can look at the guy, he's a picture of health. He says, now, we had him in the hospital. He was on death's door. He was about to die in a couple days. We had all the reports showing, look at all the conditions he has, the classic symptoms of this condition. And he's about to die. And then Gary got a hold of him, pumped him up full of raw food. And when it completely reversed it and he had all the tests to prove it, Gary Knoll said he called for a press conference. No one showed up. Why? Because the media is owned and controlled by this very small group of people who rely on us being sick, and they control everything related to it. Again, he had Arthur Ashe on there. Arthur Ashe didn't pay attention to it. Arthur Ashe claimed to have gotten his problem through blood transfusions, and that's a whole topic in itself. You're not supposed to be putting other people's blood inside of us. You're better off using some young coconut water than someone else's blood. I reflect back on all the blood I've given when I was a young man, thinking I was doing so much good. I gave more blood I had of my whole body over a period of time. I thought I was doing such a good thing, but that's bullshit. It's not the way to solve any problem. So, Arthur Ashe, he died right away. Now, I read a little bit about Arthur Ashe. It turned out he was a speed freak. So I have a feeling that Arthur Ashe might have gotten his problem, not so much from the blood, but from the way the other guys were getting it, through the drugs. So there's a lesson to be learned here, folks. We got to stop blaming the invisible killers. We're doing it to ourselves. When they tried to pull this off, it didn't pull off, did it? Think about it. Magic Johnson, he's still around, isn't he? Remember when he came down with it? It didn't catch on to the hetero community, did it? Think about that. Think about it, think about it, think about it. How many times did you hear about married couples, one has AIDS and they both don't get it? It's not contagious, folks. We're being fooled into this. It's all about making us think there are invisible killers, and they're going to be in the injections. Murder by injection. Yusuf Mullins, he understood this. His preface of that book says, after 40 years of studying everything, not only have I realized that all conspiracies are satanic, but that it's all based on medicine. They're the ones who have the power of life and death. They can take your child away from you and inject you with liquid fire. It's a form of sacrifice. Human sacrifice right now. That's what hospitals have become. Think about it. Temples of sacrifice. These people know what they're doing. People who are put in charge and promoting chemotherapy for cancer, putting the stupidest of the smart people in the infectious disease departments and in pediatrics, so they'll never see the connection between disease, the environment, and that the virus is bullshit. They'll never connect the two. It's not that complicated. If you can walk away and look at the other version. Remember, there's always going to be two versions on this when it comes to just about everything. Most of us have got too much on one side. We got to balance that out. This is all new to you. Think about it. Just think about it. AIDS didn't catch on in the heterosexual community. That's why they sent it to Africa. They made up all those lies that I explained the other day, that there are three main problems with these people in these third world countries: poor sanitation, parasitic infection, malnutrition. And those lead to about 11 or so symptoms. And as long as you got 3 or 4 of those, you've got AIDS. Now we need the vaccines. With all the money we're putting in for vaccines, that's not the solution. These people need plumbing. It's poor sanitation. But this is by design. And in order to make any sense out of this, many times you got to sort of take a step back and say, how would these 6 psychopaths do it? I've had the unfortunate pleasure to have done that. Pleasure. Wouldn't describe it as that, but I tried to get in these people's minds thinking, well, how would they do it? Well, I've looked at the evidence. I know how they're doing it. It's not complicated. You got 2 groups of people you got to control. It's all about the middle class. Half of them, there is no middle class. And we'll just vaccinate them in the name of health, and we'll kill them that way. Starve them out. Never create good water to drink and plumbing. We'll privatize the water. The other half of the world, hey, we got to have people doing something so we can have something. We got to be careful with them. If you let them grow too much, the middle class will grow too big, and we can't have that. And they know that. Aristotle knew it also. I did a video on the Kyclo cycles, how governments go through cycles. And Aristotle said the best way to avoid that cycle where we go right back to the beginning, and that's where we're at right now, we're at the end of the cycle. And the best way to keep us from going back over again, where we go back into bondage, is to have a large middle class. And that's why the powers that be are always going after the middle class. That's what's happening in America right now. Look at last century. 262 million people were murdered during peacetime by their governments. And they were the upper middle class. The term is called cold. If you're going to control the world, 2 groups, third world countries, starve them, inject them. We're going to inject you too. We want you to prosper, but not too much. And when you do, we're going to have to come in and kill some of you. How are we going to do it? Well, last century, see, we had 2 wars and 1 pandemic, but then on top of that, we got you another 262 million during peacetime. Russia, 40, 60 million people were murdered, and they were the best that Russia had to offer the upper middle class of Russia. Happens in China. The killing fields, Pol Pot. If you wore glasses, you were a threat to the government. You were dead. Didn't matter if you knew how to read or not. There's a possibility. What else you got those glasses for? So that's how you control them. And how do we keep the cycle from going back and repeating itself? We got to learn history. We've got to realize that we got to get back our freedoms. That's why I harp so much on the importance of understanding usury and understanding history, and how most of the events that happened last century that we have such a hard time understanding, quit thinking about what it was and just replace it with usury. It's a story related to usury. It's how we're being controlled. It's the absolute tool of control. Medicine, the ultimate tool of control. Money, the absolute tool of control. How do they do with money? Usury. They print our money. They make us debt slaves. John Adams, 2 ways to conquer and enslave a nation. One is by the sword, the other is by debt. That's what's happened to us. We got to wake up to this. We got to understand the role freedom has, because that's what makes America so great. That's why we appear to be so much better off than so many other countries. It's not like we have all that many resources in some, mainly because of our freedoms. And they're being eroded. It's a long, gradual process that's been implemented. And it's always done, and every time you turn around, it's being done. All the time, isn't it? Happens all the time. Remember, the people who rule the world, they own and control every major sector of human endeavor. And that allows them to bombard our brains with so much bullshit that we're going to still believe in stupid things like HIV causes AIDS. Poppycock. Gary Knoll has had people heal on that program. Charlotte Gerson at the Gerson Therapy, they've had people with this condition reversed. Don't believe these people. They don't know. They don't have an answer. And if you do their treatments, it's going to kill you that much faster. Now, there is a time and a place to use allopathic medicine. In fact, there's a time and a place to use a lot of different modalities that I classify as the art. The problem is that none of them really understand the science. There's two groups of needs, science and the art, cause and effect, the ripple effect, damage to the society, environment, and to us. But we got to respect our anatomical limitations. That first group of needs, we have a species-specific diet, and this is what all these other things that are part of the art don't do. None of them do. They'll pretend like, oh, we're going to do it, but then they don't understand what is our ideal diet. And they don't understand that it only works in an ideal world. We're not in an ideal world anymore. That's what the ripple effect, that's what that other group of needs is. That's the art. Part of that art is also how do you treat the body when it's damaged. Sometimes allopathic medicine is the way to go. Very rare. That's not the best way to approach most of the problems we have. But there is a time and a place if we're in an emergency situation. That's what allopathic medicine is good for. All they know how to do is control the body. And Mona's ponens is when you put the cart before the horse. Well, if the horse breaks its leg, you might want to put the cart before the horse so it doesn't bleed to death. That's kind of how you would use allopathic medicine. That's why you don't want to waste your time trying to find any logical fallacy with conventional medicine, allopathic medicine. No, not the wind, my blanket blew over yesterday. Because they already have an invalid structure, Mona's ponens are putting the cart before the horse for a problem within our control. AIDS is the problem within our control. Unless you have that designation in Africa and you don't have the resources to get up and move and get out of the hellhole you're in. By design, 40,000 children die a day because of the powers that be, while the rest of us are slaving our butts off and we don't even know what life is all about. We shouldn't have to work more than a couple hours a week collectively if we had our act together just to get the basics. And then we would be busy as beavers all over the place making the world better. And whoa, that day happens, and it is going to happen. We're all in for a treat.